Back at the beginning of the year, Landline reported on the extraordinary impact the booming coal seam gas industry was having on rural Queensland. The federal and state governments have since signed off on multi-billion-dollar export projects that will take the industry to a new level of investment and production. So much so, the Reserve Bank factored them into its recent decision to raise interest rates. Yet farmers and green groups are dismayed by what they see is the indecent haste of this latest resource bonanza and what that might mean long term for the value of farmland and the quality of water.
Queensland gets a whole new industry. This means jobs for a generation.
We're sitting on underground water aquifers here that must be protected at all costs.
This is about bringing home the bacon to Queensland.
Something's not done. We just don't know what the end game is going to be.
We really have to keep the bastards honest.
As well as creating thousands of jobs and generating billions in investment, the exploitation of Queensland's coal seam gas reserves has sparked fierce debate about the environmental risks.
But the underground water aquifer with the Great Artesian Basin is extremely important to the whole of Queensland, South Australia, Northern Territory and New South Wales. This is a major resource and asset that Australia owns. It's one thing, there will be no life west of the Great Divide if we have a real muck-up with the Great Artesian Basin.
For farmers, the two big questions are what effect will drilling into coal seams have on underground aquifers, and how will the large amounts of salt and water coming up with the gas be safely disposed of?
No one knows what goes on underground in the detail that we need for this industry to go forward. The few scientists that are around that do have a reasonable understanding of the underground systems are saying, you know, they're really ringing the alarm bells.
Dalby grain grower Wayne Newton is involved in the debate because gas companies and farmers work the same land. He says it's proving an unequal relationship.
And at the moment, the whole thing seems to be slewed in favour of the resource companies and not very much concern about the natural resources, the Great Artesian Basin, and probably more importantly to us, the communities that live in inland Australia.
While Wayne Newton's been asking the hard questions about coal seam gas for years, it's only in the last 6 months that anti-gas groups have gained momentum. There have been rallies out in gas country.
Why would they want to put gas wells here? It's ridiculous.
And the city.
Shame on you, Queensland Gas.
The issue's been taken up by federal politicians.
The environmental expert advising us saying that water tables may drop by more than 15 metres.
And it's even brought farmers and green groups together.
Sometimes these issues make strange bedfellows, but the reality is we will accept and welcome anyone who's looking at the same agenda as we are, and that is one of sustainable land management practice.
I think we've got common interests here. What we've got at stake is the preservation of good agricultural land, of our underground water systems, which are in dire peril.
Wayne Newton says the Cecil Plains protest was a turning point.
When a group of totally mild-mannered, easy-going rural farmers get that upset that they want to mount that sort of a campaign, people suddenly sit up and say, hey, there's something going on here.
There are nearly 4,000 coal seam gas wells in Queensland, supplying 30% of the state's electricity and 70% of its gas needs.
Two major coal seam gas projects in Queensland.
In October, the industry was supercharged by the federal government's approval of 2 CSG export proposals. An investment surge that could result in 40,000 wells operating by 2020.
Certainly the scale is something that will test us. Queensland's a pretty big state. Whilst 40,000 is a big number, there's a lot of territory to cover.
But we still don't know what the overall cumulative impact will be when we start talking about 40,000 wells just in southeast Queensland alone.
3 weeks ago, UK energy giant BG Group became the first company to detail its export project to be built at Curtis Island near Gladstone.
Over the next 4 years, we will build the world's first liquefied natural gas plant to use coal seam gas as a feedstock. In doing so, we will create a new industry for Queensland.
The cost, a staggering $15 billion.
We estimate that the project will increase economic activity in Queensland by 32 billion Australian dollars over the project's first decade, or 2.6 billion a year. We also expect to pay about $1 billion a year in federal taxes and a further $300 million or so each year in royalties to the Queensland Government.
Two indications of just how important this one project is sat either side of Catherine Tanner.
It will further enhance the reputation of the region as one of the great powerhouses of the Australian economy.
This represents an economic opportunity not just for Queensland and the local community, but for Australia as a nation.
Hot on the heels of that news, Origin Energy announced it had Queensland Government approval for its $35 billion export joint venture with US firm ConocoPhillips.
This is a massive project. It is a project that will bring 6,000 jobs to Gladstone, central Queensland and the southwest of our state.
But while the politicians and energy executives revel in each new announcement, and there are 2 more set to come, farmers and green groups are worried. Just last month, banned chemicals were detected in 8 of Origin's exploration wells. And this month, Arrow Energy reported chemicals had contaminated 1 well.
The unfortunate reality of those contamination scares often brings to bear the relevance of what we've been requesting.
It turned out to be not an inappropriate or illegal use of fracking chemicals. There appears to be other reasons for detecting those minute traces of benzene.
There's so many unanswered questions in all of this that the Queensland Government, instead of rushing in a mad sort of fever to get this industry off the ground, should have been taking the time to work out all the answers, and they haven't done so.
Throw in reports of leaking gas wells and reliable bores dropping suddenly or going salty, and farmers are spooked.
Government and resource companies are investigating, but it is taking too long to get a response, and really no one knows yet what is going on there.
The main objection is that it's an unproven technology, and that the state government and federal government now have allowed an uncontrolled experiment to be conducted out there on the Darling Downs and elsewhere in Queensland.
Even local government worries shortcuts are being taken.
You know, it's that 4-letter word, jobs, jobs and jobs. You know, it's not all about that. There's a few other 4-letter words there too called food. They've got to be fair dinkum about this because you're playing with the future of our food and fibre, and that's extremely important for our agricultural sector.
Queensland's Premier insists the 1,200 federal and state government regulations will protect the environment.
We are taking concerns about this industry very, very seriously. That's why we're exposing them to the highest number of environmental conditions ever applied to any industry ever started here in Queensland.
While claiming scientists know enough to predict the impact of gas drilling, Queensland's Mines Minister says there's a certain amount of learning as you go in this game.
At some stage, with the invention of the motor car, someone had to take it out of the garage for the test drive, to prove it up.
That's just not good enough for Queensland's farm lobby group, which has become so frustrated by the government's attitude, it has resigned from a consultative committee and called for a moratorium on further development.
Draw a line in the sand right now of the 3,500 operational wells that we have, of all the exploration works, of all the pumping works, the gathering lines, the whole lot, until we know and fully understand just what some of these impacts are. Because if we don't understand that, these industries are on our land for a very short time. We have described them as hit and run because they are on the landscape for less than a generation. And yet that it is us as landholders that we're left with a legacy once they leave, and we don't know what that legacy is yet.
I don't believe a moratorium is necessary whilst we've got such a robust process in place to ensure environmental responsibility and sustainability of these industries.
Farmers and green groups worry decisions are being rushed because governments have much to gain.
That's been an issue of ours for some time, Pip. The reality is that the referee of this game is also the sole largest beneficiary of the game.
At the heart of every decision that I take is my judgment about what is sustainable, what is in the best interests of Queensland, economically, socially and environmentally. That view is not just mine, it's shared by many, if not all, of my colleagues who sit around the cabinet table.
So you're not tempted by the bucks?
No.
Farmers say they're being asked to take on trust government assurances that everything will be all right.
If we don't get that balance right, then one industry will ultimately fail. And right now, we can already see through the contamination scares that we've had, the landscape competition scares that we've had, and the possible impacts on issues like groundwater, it doesn't take a genius to work out which industry can fail pretty quickly.
While the energy companies plan their next phase, so are the anti-gas groups.
Let them take, farmers to the land court. They can't take 1,000 farmers to the land court. And if they do, the people of Queensland are going to have some pretty serious questions to ask about that. It'll be the most significant social movement this country has seen since the days of the Franklin